On my 73rd birthday, my husband stood another woman and two young adults next to me and announced to our guests, "This is my second family, the one I've kept hidden for 30 years." My daughters stared at him in horror, but I simply smiled, handed him a small box, and said, "I knew. This gift is for you." He opened it, and his hands began to tremble. "Welcome to Betty Stories. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and liked my video. Now let's jump back into my story. I'm sure you'll love it if you keep listening till the end." The morning of my 73rd birthday smelled of freshly brewed coffee and the geraniums in my garden. The air was still cool, almost dew-soaked, before the summer heat fully settled in. I woke up at 6 o'clock sharp, as always, without an alarm. The sun had just touched the crowns of the old oak trees, and its slanted rays drew long, gleaming lines across the floor of the glassed-in sunroom. I love this moment because the silence is still thick, untouched by the day's hustle. In moments like these, you think you can hear the grass grow. It was one of those rare hours when the world hadn't yet put on the mask of duty and false pretense that Jerome and I had worn for decades. The sunroom, my sanctuary, housed the table Jerome had built some 40 years ago, a massive piece of mahogany that could have survived the storms of many marriages if its foundation hadn't been so rotten. I looked out into my garden. Every shrub, every flower bed, every winding path, all of it had been conceived and tended by me. This house, our estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, was my never-realized concert hall. Sometimes, when I was alone and heard the echo of my steps in the high ceilings, they sounded like the opening notes of a string quartet. Long ago, in another life, I was a young, promising architect. I had the project of my dreams, a new convention center and concert hall right in downtown Manhattan. I was selected and received full funding. I remember the smell of the thick drafting paper, the scratch of the graphite pencil tracing the lines of a future marvel of glass and concrete. I could almost hear the acoustics, the silence of the empty hall before the first violin notes filled it. Back then I had a fire in me, a certainty in my abilities that was as clear and strong as a sunbeam breaking through crystal. The memory of the graphite on paper was especially sharp this morning. It was the eternal scar that reminded me of Jerome's biggest lie, the lie that our shared future would be grander than my personal dream. Then came Jerome with his first genius business idea, high-end manufacturing equipment imported from Europe that was going to make us rich. We didn't have the necessary money, and I made a decision. I liquidated the inheritance intended for my dream, for my future, and gave him every last dime. It was a rainy November day. The drops tapped against the windows of my small architecture office as I signed the transfer. I watched the light flicker in his eyes when I handed him the signed papers, a hungry, greedy light that I mistook for gratitude back then. He hugged me, holding me tight, and I felt the warm breath of his thanks on my neck. "You are unbelievable, Vivian," he whispered. "We're building something bigger. Something better for us." In that moment, I believed him because I loved him. My own signature felt like I was signing a contract with destiny itself, trading my own talent for his grand promise. It wasn't a sacrifice, I thought then. It was an investment in us. The business folded in less than 1 year, leaving behind only debts that my wise father quietly settled, and I remained here. Instead of a concert hall, I built this house, pouring everything I had into it, the remnants of my talent, all my strength, my unlived love for form and line. This home became my silent masterpiece, one that no one but me considered such. Jerome saw it only as an asset that testified to his success. He never saw the architectural soul I had engraved within it. "Vivian, have you seen my blue polo shirt? The one that looks best on me." My husband's voice tore me from my memories. Jerome stood in the doorway, already in dress pants, a frown etched on his face, focused only on himself. Not a word about my birthday, not a single glance at the festive linen tablecloth I'd pulled from the cabinet yesterday. 73 years old, 50 years together. To him, it was just another Thursday. His indifference wasn't painful. It was just a known fact now, as reliable as the sunrise. How many birthdays had I wished he would pause, if only for one moment, and look at me. Not the caterer, not the hostess, but the woman who gave him her life. In the top drawer of the dresser. I ironed it yesterday, I answered calmly, without turning around. I knew he wouldn't notice the new tablecloth or the vase of peonies I'd cut at dawn. The peonies, whose heavy pink heads would tonight mask the offense of his revelation with their innocent scent. He had stopped noticing such things 3 decades ago. To him, I was part of the decor. Comfortable, reliable, familiar, like this armchair, like this table, the foundation. He loved that word. "You're my foundation, Vivian," he'd say sometimes after his 3rd glass of cognac. He had no idea how right he was. He had used that foundation to erect his own dual life upon it without ever wondering if it would collapse under the weight. The phone rang. My eldest daughter, Shanice. I felt the metallic churn of the disappointment I'd been nursing for 1 year, since finding out Jerome had not only another woman, but 2 grown children. Shanice, my daughter who resembled Jerome in such a convenient way. "Hi, Mom. Happy birthday. Listen, we're stuck in traffic coming into Greenwich. It's terrible. Could you please start the food already? We don't want to arrive and nothing be ready. And watch Dad make sure he doesn't drink too much before we get there. You know how he is." She spoke fast, in an irritated tone, as if my birthday was another bothersome obligation on her packed calendar. I wasn't the birthday girl. I was the catering staff for the party held in my honor. In Shanice's voice lay the same self-evident expectation as in Jerome's behavior. She saw me as the immovable constant who keeps everything in order, who puts her own needs aside so that their lives run smoothly. She had learned to close her eyes to the irregularities, as long as she herself benefited from the convenience of the system. "Don't worry, Shanice. Everything will be ready." I hung up. I didn't feel a lump in my chest. That had happened long ago. There was only a quiet, transparent emptiness, like the air after a late summer rain. I discovered Jerome's double life 1 year ago through a stupid coincidence. A wrongly addressed hotel receipt fell out of his jacket pocket. First came the shock, then the rage, but only for 1 hour. After that came the strategy. I sat down at the mahogany table right here on the sunroom and called Mark Sterling, my father's old attorney. The realization wasn't painful. It was the bitter certainty that I had sacrificed my dream not just for a man, but for an empty suit. By 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the house was full of guests, old friends, relatives, Jerome's business associates. Everyone came, offered kind words to me, handed me flowers, and praised my apple pie and my garden. I smiled, accepted well wishes, and served homemade lemonade. I played my role, the happy wife, mother, and hostess of this grand welcoming estate in Connecticut. A role I had written and rehearsed for half a century. Today, however, I didn't just wear this role. I wore it like a heavy stage coat that I would soon take off. Every smile, every thank you, every filled lemonade glass was a farewell to the image they had of me. I looked into their faces and wondered how many of them concealed similar lies in their own flawless houses. Jerome was in his element. He moved from group to group, patting men's backs, complimenting ladies. He was the center of this world, the master of the house. He spoke about his professional successes, about the lucrative deal he was about to close. He said, "My house, my trees," and no one contradicted him. No one knew that this house, as well as our apartment in the Upper West Side and all our savings, were registered solely in my name, at the insistence of my wise father. It was my silent, invisible fortress, my last bastion. My father had recognized Jerome's true nature decades ago, that lack of substance that had to be replaced by bragging. He hadn't saved me from love, but he had saved me from poverty. My younger daughter, Nia, arrived. She was the only one who didn't hug me out of duty, but really tightly. She looked me in the eyes and quietly asked, "Mom, is everything okay?" In that gaze was a deep, quiet empathy I hadn't felt in a long time. "Everything is good, darling," I smiled. She nodded, but her gaze retained a hint of fear. Naya always felt more than the others. She was my silent accomplice, the only one to whom I had revealed the truth piece by piece over 1 year. For a long time now, she had looked at her father with a silent, cool disapproval that he simply didn't notice in his egocentrism. She instinctively knew that the foundation he so casually mentioned wasn't made of marble, but of the fragile glass of my shattered dreams. She was the anchor, the only one who hadn't been corrupted by Jerome's narcissism. Then came the moment I had waited for and simultaneously dreaded all year. Jerome took a glass of sparkling cider and tapped it with a knife, asking for silence. The guests quieted, expecting a toast. He stood in the middle of the lawn, upright, still in good shape at 75, with the aura and posture of a man convinced of his right to everything. "Friends, family," he began loudly, with a theatrical pause. "Today we celebrate the birthday of my dear Vivian, my rock, my faithful companion." He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw nothing but smugness. He believed he was doing me a favor by revealing his secrets. But today, I want to do more than just wish her well. I want to finally be honest, with all of you, with myself, and with her. The guests exchanged glances. The anticipation hanging in the air smelled of scandal and stale cider. I stood motionless, feeling dozens of curious eyes on me. Nia froze beside me. Her hand found mine. Her hand was cold, but firm. It was as if she was transferring all her youthful strength to me. Our hands spoke without words, sharing the knowledge of the coming catastrophe and our shared resolve. "Friends," Jerome continued, his voice trembling with barely concealed triumph, "for 30 years I have led a double life, and today I want to set things straight." He gave a signal to someone near the garden gate. A woman in her mid-50s, well-maintained and with a hard, calculating look, entered the illuminated circle. I recognized her. Tanya. She used to be my subordinate in my architecture office. A sharp smell of expensive, sweet perfume wafted across the lawn, as intrusive and inappropriate as Tanya's entire existence in my garden. Behind her stood 2 young adults, a man and a woman, with equally confused and defiant faces. Jerome walked toward them, put an arm around Tanya's shoulder, and led her to me. "Vivian was such a stable foundation," he said, looking over my head at the guests, "that, as you can see, I was able to build not just 1, but 2 houses upon it. This foundation has carried all of us, so please welcome my true love, Tanya, and our children, Marcus and Dana. It's time for all my successes to be shared by my entire family." He said this, and physically placed Tanya right next to me, so close I could smell her intrusive perfume. He positioned her as if for a family portrait. The intention was clear. He wanted to push me out of the picture, make me an insignificant footnote. My eldest daughter, Shanice, let out a gasp. Nia squeezed my hand until my knuckles turned white. The laughter and conversations froze mid-sentence. An incredible, booming silence settled over the garden. In that moment, I didn't feel the ground disappear beneath my feet or my heart break. No, I felt something else, something very calm and final. A cool, clear click. It was as if the key in a heavy, rusted lock, which had resisted for so long, finally turned and the massive steel gate slammed shut forever. The pain had died long before this day. Today, only the corpse was cleared away. There were no tears, only the cold satisfaction of preparation. My mind quietly said, "He set the rules of the game. Fine, then we'll play." The world around us paused. I saw my neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, freeze a cocktail glass halfway to her lips. I saw my son-in-law, Shanice's husband, turn pale. and instinctively stepped back, as if afraid of being hit by the debris of a collapsing life. The silence was so dense it seemed palpable. It pressed on my ears, drowning out the sounds of summer, the chirping of the crickets, the rustling of the leaves. Slowly I turned my head and smiled. Not bitterly, not vengefully. I smiled that polite and slightly distant smile with which the lady of the house greets latecomers. I let my gaze sweep over their stunned faces, lingering for a fraction of a second on each one to let them know that I saw them, that I was present, that I was fully aware of the situation. Then I turned to Jerome. He still held Tanya's shoulders firmly. His face radiated smugness and the importance of the moment. He expected my reaction: tears, hysteria, a scene. He was ready to be the magnanimous victor soothing the losing party. He waited for the echo of his words that he was accustomed to, the humility of the defeated. He was completely unprepared for the silence. I walked to the small patio table where my gift for him lay, a single box tied with a navy blue silk ribbon. The wrapping paper was thick, ivory-colored, and unadorned, severely elegant. 1 year ago, when I found everything out, I had spent hours choosing that paper. It was important to me that everything was impeccable. I picked up the box. It was light, almost weightless. I returned to Jerome, who looked at me in confusion. "I knew, Jerome," I said. My voice didn't tremble. It sounded balanced and calm, perhaps a little quieter than usual. "This gift is for you." I handed him the box. He hesitated for a moment. His meticulously staged script had failed. This part wasn't in it. Mechanically, he let go of Tanya's shoulder and took the gift. His fingers brushed mine, warm, slightly damp. I pulled my hand back. He looked at the box, then at me. Confusion flashed in his eyes, quickly replaced by a condescending smile. He probably thought it was a pathetic gesture, an attempt to save face, perhaps an expensive watch or cufflinks, a parting gift. He pulled the ribbon. The silk slid across the lawn like a dark snake. He tore open the paper. His movements were less secure, now a little jerkier than necessary. Beneath the paper was a simple white cardboard box. He opened the lid. I watched his face. In the hollow where my heart once was, nothing moved. I was a spectator in the front row of a play whose ending I knew by heart. He looked inside. At the bottom of the box, on a piece of white satin, lay a single, plain house key, a perfectly ordinary key that smelled of fresh paint, and next to it, a thick sheet of paper folded 4 times. Jerome took it out and unfolded it. Tanya leaned forward greedily, trying to decipher the lawyer's calligraphic script. The confusion on her face turned into slight irritation. Why the fuss over a key? I watched his eyes skim the lines, first fast, then slower, as if he was stumbling over every word. I knew those words by heart. I had helped my attorney formulate them. Service of the divorce petition on grounds of ongoing marital infidelity. Based on sole ownership documents, immediate notification is given of the freeze on all joint accounts and assets. Access to the properties at the following addresses is prohibited. First, estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. Second, apartment at the Upper West Side, Manhattan. His left hand, holding the sheet, was the first to start trembling. A fine, barely noticeable tremor that traveled up to his shoulder. Then his right hand also began to shake. The paper rustled in his grip like an autumn leaf in the wind. He looked up at me. The smugness was gone. The triumph faded. Now, an aging, confused man with an ashen face stared at me. In his eyes was neither rage nor pain, only pure, primal astonishment. It was as if he had walked on solid, dependable ground his entire life, and it had suddenly opened up into an abyss beneath his feet. The guests murmured uneasily. It wasn't the drama they had expected. It was the sudden reversal of the balance of power that shocked them. He tried to say something, opening his mouth, but only a rough, soundless gasp escaped him. He looked at the paper again, then at the key. then back at me. He searched my face for an answer, a hint, a sign that this was some kind of cruel, ridiculous joke, but my face was a calm, impenetrable mask. I had spent 50 years concealing my true feelings. 50 years building this facade, this foundation, as he liked to call it. And today, that facade held. Behind it, there was nothing. No pain, no love, no pity. Just a cold, deafening freedom. Tanya beside him understood nothing. She stared nervously at Jerome's changing face. "Jerome, what is it? What does it say?" she whispered, trying to catch a glimpse of the document. He didn't answer. He just stood there, staring at me. And his world, so comfortable, so secure, built on my life, my money, and my silence, collapsed live in front of all his friends and relatives. Tanya, finally seeing the papers, let out a soft cry as she deciphered the word account freeze. Her calculating gaze froze into blank horror. She wasn't the new queen. She was the accomplice of a pauper. The expensive, sweet cloud of her perfume seemed to sour in that moment. I held his gaze and then slowly, very slowly, turned to Nia, my child, my only true anchor. She looked at me, and her eyes were full of tears, not of pity, but of pride. She had understood everything. I gave her a small nod and said, just loud enough for her to hear, "It's time." She squeezed my hand even tighter. That was enough. The show was over. It was time to draw the curtain. Nia understood without words. Her fingers on my forearm became hard as steel. She nodded, and without planning it, we turned and walked toward the house. We didn't run. We walked with firm steps, with dignity, away from the scene frozen on the lawn. The guests recoiled from us like water from an icebreaker, avoiding our eyes, whispering quietly. I felt their stares on my back, a mix of shock, pity, and, let's be honest, schadenfreude. Jerome remained standing in the center, the white paper trembling in his hands, next to the woman for whom he had staged this grand revelation. A revelation that had completely deviated from his script. He called something after us. My name, I think, but the sound of his voice drowned in the thick, viscous silence that lay over my garden. He no longer had power over me. Even his voice was foreign to me. We entered the house. I paused in the living room and said, facing the door to the sunroom, loud enough to be heard outside, "Dear friends, thank you all for coming to share this day with me. Unfortunately, the celebration is now over. Please help yourselves to the cake and have one more drink. All the best." That was all. A simple, polite announcement. No explanations, no drama. A hasty, silent exodus began. I heard muffled voices, quick steps on the gravel, the starting of car engines. No one came inside to say goodbye. No one dared to look me in the eye. 10 minutes later, only abandoned plates, half-empty glasses, and trampled flowers lay in the garden. I watched Jerome finally awaken from his stupor, grab Tanya by the arm, and drag her toward the garden gate. His movements were jerky, furious. He practically hauled her and his confused children behind him, stumbling, looking toward the house with an expression of pure, primal rage. He was no longer the master of the house. He was an outcast. Tanya's face was rigid, a mixture of anger and the dawning realization that the rich lover had suddenly become a useless financial liability. When the last car was gone and the evening stillness returned to the neighborhood, Nia came to me and hugged me. "It's over, darling," I said, stroking her hair. "Everything is exactly as it should be. Will you help me clear the table?" And we began cleaning up in silence. We collected dirty dishes, folded tablecloths, and took out the trash. This familiar, monotonous work was calming. Every gesture had a purpose. Every movement was known. I washed the glasses, the fine lead crystal glasses we had received as a wedding gift. The water washed away the traces of foreign lips, foreign wine. I felt that something else was being washed away with the dirt. 50 years of sticky cobwebs that I had mistaken for family ties. Nia handed me a bowl. The water in the sink was steaming and smelled of lemon dish soap. It was a smell of cleanliness, of demarcation, of a new beginning. I realized that I wasn't just clearing the remains of the party, but the remains of my old, failed life. Nia worked beside me, throwing worried glances my way occasionally. She expected me to break down, to cry, to scream, but I was calm. Inside me, everything was quiet and empty. There was no pain, no resentment, only an immense, cool relief. It was as if I had carried an unbearable burden on my shoulders my whole life and had finally cast it off. It was late when we finished. The house was clean and quiet again. Mine. I brewed myself a cup of mint herbal tea from the garden. We sat on the sunroom wrapped in blankets, looking up at the dark, star-studded sky. The smell of mint mixed with the damp scent of earth after watering. The cry of the caged animal. Suddenly, my cell phone vibrated on the table, sharp and disharmonious, tearing the peace. Nia picked it up. Jerome's name flashed on the screen. The call broke off, and a second later, a notification for a new voicemail arrived. Nia looked at me questioningly. I nodded. She turned on the speaker, and the voice ripped through the night silence, distorted by rage, breaking into a screech. "Vivian, have you gone crazy? What kind of circus was that? You humiliated me in front of everyone. Is this your little tantrum, your pathetic revenge? Have you become completely senile in your old age? I'm trying to pay for a hotel, and my cards are blocked. My cards. Do you understand what you've done?" He choked on his anger. The voice didn't sound like that of a powerful businessman, but like the desperate roar of a caged animal. It was the sound of privilege unexpectedly withdrawn. In the background, I heard Tanya's soothing voice. "Jerome, calm down." "Don't talk to me," he screamed. "Vivian has left me penniless. I don't know what kind of midlife crisis you're going through, but I'm giving you until tomorrow morning to reactivate everything. Call the bank and say it was a mistake, a ridiculous joke. Otherwise, I swear to you, you will regret it. Do you hear me? You will regret it bitterly. Come to your senses before it's too late." The message cut off. We sat in silence for a while. Even the crickets seemed to have quieted. Nia looked at me with a strained face. "Mom." I slowly took my now cold cup of tea. My fingers were steady. I took a sip. The mint flavor was fresh and clear. "He still doesn't get it," I said. "He and Tanya think this is an outburst, a feminine fit of pique, a silly, comical bluff that will be over by tomorrow morning when I've come to my senses. They didn't see the plan, the preparation, and the cold fury that accumulated and turned to ice inside me for 1 year. They only saw what they wanted to see, an aging, insulted wife daring to make a scene. They still think they're in control." I slowly rotated the cup in my hands. "They only see me through the lens of their own arrogance, and arrogance is the blindness of the mind." I looked at Nia. Her eyes held the same question as Jerome's voice. "What now?" I placed the cup on the table. The sound of the porcelain on the wood was the only one in the night. "I have a meeting with my attorney at 10 o'clock, I said quietly. "I want you to come with me." My voice was firm. There were no doubts in me. My husband's angry scream on my voicemail didn't frighten me. It only strengthened my resolve. Just as a blacksmith plunges glowing metal into cold water to harden it, his words turned my will into steel, the true nature of betrayal. The drive to Manhattan the next morning was silent. Nia drove, clutching the steering wheel tightly, staring at the road. I looked out the window at the passing Connecticut landscape, but I didn't see it. I only saw his confused, rage-reddened face, distorted by incomprehension. He still believed this was my fault, something that could be canceled like a wrong restaurant order. He didn't realize that yesterday wasn't the beginning, but the end, the final period I had worked toward for an entire year. The law firm of attorney Mark Sterling was located in an old building in the financial district. A heavy paneled door, the scent of expensive cologne and old books. Mark Sterling himself matched his office. Dignified, older, with an attentive, inscrutable gaze. He had worked with my father, which is why I sought him out. I knew I could trust him. He greeted us at the door, led us to a large table, and offered us coffee. We declined. "Well, Vivian," he began when we were seated, in a quiet business tone. "As agreed, all initial service was sent out, and accounts and assets are frozen. The process is underway. Has Jerome or his representation contacted you?" "There was a voicemail," I answered calmly. "Threats and accusations of hysteria." Mark Sterling nodded, as if that was exactly what he expected. "That's predictable. He hasn't grasped the seriousness of the situation yet. He's still playing his usual game where he's the boss, but that will change soon." He paused and folded his hands on the table. His gaze hardened. "Vivian, we initiated the standard procedure, but there's something else. When you first came to me, out of old habit and respect for your father's memory, I felt it necessary to conduct an additional, deeper examination, just in case. I needed to understand what we were dealing with, and my fears were unfortunately more than justified." He opened a desk drawer and pulled out a thin folder. He placed it in front of me. The folder had no label. "I am obliged to inform you of something extremely unpleasant. This goes beyond his infidelity. It speaks of a calculated, premeditated action personally directed against you." Nia tensed up, her hand resting on mine. I didn't move, only stared at the folder. "What is it?" I asked. Mark Sterling opened the folder and slid several sheets toward me. "This is a copy of an application your husband filed with Health Services 2 months ago, an official request for a mandatory psychiatric evaluation of your competency." Time stood still. I heard Nia gasp beside me, but I only stared at the document. An official form, typewritten text, and beneath it, Jerome's familiar, sprawling signature. "This is the first legal step," the lawyer's dispassionate voice continued, sounding as if it came from far away. "Required to have a person declared legally incompetent and gain guardianship over them, and consequently full authority to manage all their assets." I picked up the top sheet. It was a list of alleged symptoms my husband had observed. I started reading. "Frequently loses personal belongings. Cannot recall where she placed her glasses, keys, or documents, suggesting a progressive loss of short-term memory." I remembered searching for my reading glasses a week earlier, only to find them on top of my head. Nia and I had laughed, a smile that he had noted to now misuse as evidence of my mental confusion. "Exhibits disorientation in daily life. Confuses basic staples in the pantry, such as salt and sugar, which can pose a danger to herself and others." Once, distracted, I had put salt into the sugar bowl. I realized it a minute later and corrected it. Jerome had quipped, "You're working too hard, Mama." He hadn't quipped. He had been collecting. He had hoarded every mistake, every fatigue, every moment of human inattention in his head, like a miser hoarding gold coins, to now deploy them as a weapon. Shows signs of social isolation and apathy, refuses to meet friends, spends long periods alone in the garden, and holds conversations with plants, which may indicate a detachment from reality. My garden, my only refuge, my hours of silence among peonies and roses where I could breathe. He had even turned this into a symptom of illness, a weapon against me. The garden I had created with the remnants of my architectural talent was now supposed to testify to the confinement of my mind. It was only in this moment that I understood the true depth of his contempt. He didn't see me as their partner. He saw me as something to be disposed of. I read on. Every line was poison, a grain of truth distorted beyond recognition and carefully mixed with outright lies. Every innocent gesture, every moment of tiredness, every age-related instance of forgetfulness, everything was inverted and presented as proof of my madness. My hands, resting on the polished surface of the table, did not tremble, but I felt the warmth drain from my fingertips, first from one, then from the other. The cold slowly crept to my palms, my wrists. It was as if my blood was retreating, leaving behind an icy void. Nia placed her hand on mine and whispered, "This is despicable, Mom. He's a monster." I barely nodded. It was important that she said it, so it wouldn't remain just a thought. I looked up and out the window. Life was bustling behind the thick glass, but for a brief moment, this whole loud, busy Manhattan day froze for me. The sounds faded. A silence of absolute emptiness descended, and in that silence I understood. This wasn't just infidelity. Infidelity is the betrayal of love. But this was something else, a complete, cold, calculated destruction. He didn't just want to leave with another woman. He wanted to erase me, to strip me not only of my house and money, but of my mind, my name, my very being, to turn me into a voiceless shadow, locked between four walls, while he and his true love enjoyed everything I had created in my life. It was a plan to annihilate my identity. If he had me declared insane, he not only took my assets, but also the possibility of ever exercising my rights or telling my story. He wanted to reduce me to nothing, the last warm ember in my soul, which I might have unconsciously reserved for him, an ember of pity or shared memory, didn't just extinguish, it turned into a block of ice. Slowly, I placed the documents on the table and stacked them neatly. I looked at Mark Sterling, then at Nia's pale, anxious face. "Thank you, Mark," I said. My voice was just as steady as before, but something in it had changed, something final. "The picture is now complete. What are our next steps?" The revenge I had planned was merely a divorce. The new revenge was the destruction of the man who tried to kill my soul. It was no longer personal. It was necessary. The system's collapse. Mark Sterling acted quickly, with the cold, precise efficiency of a surgeon removing a tumor. While Nia and I drove home, his messengers were already delivering notices across Manhattan and Greenwich. His assistants were already calling the banks. The mechanism I had prepared for so long and so carefully was set in motion with a single nod in his office. The first blow, as Mark later told me, hit Jerome where he least expected it. At breakfast, in an expensive hotel. He and Tanya were probably still debating my ridiculous tantrum, planning how they would magnanimously accept my repentance. He sat there, maybe eating a croissant, thinking he had won, that I was just an old woman who could be brought back into line with a few apologetic words. At that moment, a man in an impeccable suit approached their table and silently placed a thick envelope in front of Jerome. It contained not just the divorce papers. There was an official court order prohibiting him from contacting me, except through attorneys, and a separate order prohibiting him from entering any property registered in my name. I can imagine him reading it, the condescending smile receding from his face, replaced by furious red splotches. He probably crumpled the paper, threw it on the floor, and shouted about an abuse of power and how half of it belonged to him. He still believed it. He believed that his 50 years of presence in my life automatically entitled him to everything I had acquired, built, and saved. The next step was a reality against which he crashed like a wave against a rock. They drove to the apartment in the Upper West Side. He probably intended to make a scene, kick in the door, and show who was in charge. Instead, he stood on the landing, inserting his key in vain into the shiny new lock. His key no longer fit. He could ring, hammer, or scream. The door remained silent. That door, which I had chosen 30 years ago, padded with dark leather, was now foreign to him, an insurmountable barrier. He probably hammered on the dark, cool leather he used to casually brush past. Tanya stood behind him, watching her foundation crumble to dust. Every useless key in his hand was proof of his impotence. I was home during this time. A locksmith came, an older, quiet man. He worked quickly and quietly with metallic sounds. He removed the old locks from the garden gate and the main door, the same ones for which Jerome had keys. I stood on the sunroom and listened to those sounds. Every turn of the screwdriver, every click of the new mechanism was music, the music of liberation. This wasn't revenge, it was disinfection. I was cleansing my home of filth. The smell of fresh oil and metal mixed with the scent of the geraniums. The house was sealed, not just physically, but spiritually. The final and most humiliating blow awaited him on the street in front of the apartment. As he, exhausted and furious, prepared to leave to concoct a new plan, he saw a tow truck approaching his car, the glossy black SUV I had given him for his birthday 3 years ago. 2 workers in orange safety vests efficiently hooked up the vehicle and began hoisting it onto the platform. Jerome ran toward them, flailing his arms, shouting something about private property, but the foreman silently handed him the documentation, an official notice for the return of the property to the rightful owner. My name was on the paper. Vivian Caldwell, owner. I imagined Tanya's face in that moment. She stood nearby, on the sidewalk, watching the symbol of her security, her status, slowly disappear into the unknown. Blocked cards are an inconvenience. Divorce papers are a scandal. A locked door is an insult. But when your car is towed away right in front of your nose, when you're standing on a Manhattan sidewalk, penniless, homeless, and without transport, that's when it dawns on you. In that exact moment, I am sure, her condescension gave way to fear. She looked at her husband, who was shouting in vain at the departing tow truck, and understood. She understood that they were not dealing with an insulted, weeping old woman, not with a victim that could be appeased and cheated. They had encountered something cold, quiet, and absolutely methodical. A silent executioner who didn't scream or threaten, but step by step cut off everything that connected them to their familiar world. The panic, I assume, came later that night. That sticky, primal panic of a person who suddenly realizes they own nothing. They were probably sitting somewhere in a cheap, rented room at distant relatives. And Jerome continued to rage, promising to sue everyone, punish everyone, fix everything. And she, more pragmatic, smarter, just sat there, piecing it together. The estate belongs to her, the apartment belongs to her, the accounts belong to her, the car belongs to her. Everything they were accustomed to, everything they thought was their right, turned out to be an illusion. Dust. They had built their lives on my foundation for 30 years without ever bothering to check who owned that foundation. The neighbors probably heard their screams, his screams full of rage and impotence, her screams full of fear and accusation. You said everything was under control. You promised she couldn't do anything. We should have acted sooner, Jerome, with the doctors, with the evaluation. These late, hysterical accusations testified to their deepest guilt. They had interpreted my kindness as stupidity and assumed that age and abandonment made me defenseless. They realized that the greatest danger lay not in confrontation, but in silence. They didn't lose yesterday on my birthday. They lost 2 months ago. When he put his signature on that application, he handed me the weapon himself. He himself showed me that this wasn't about love or resentment. It was about survival. And I accepted the rules of that war. A call from Nia late that night confirmed my thoughts. Her older sister, Shanice, had called her completely hysterical. Dad was crying on the phone. He's screaming that Mom has gone crazy, that you're manipulating her, that she kicked him out onto the street, left him penniless. Nia, what's going on? We have to do something. He's our father. Nia replied coolly and calmly. Where were you, Shanice, when he stood his mistress next to Mom on her own birthday? Where were you when he humiliated her in front of all the guests? Shanice stammered something unintelligible about the need to talk, that one couldn't do something like this. She saw not the depth of the matter, but only the disruption of the customary order of things for her father. For Shanice, the tragedy wasn't the 30-year lie, but the fact that she now had to take responsibility herself or leave her comfort zone. She wasn't defending her father, she was defending the system that supplied her. I took the phone from Nia. Shanice, I said quietly, don't worry, your father will be fine. He's just learning to live independently for the first time in 50 years. I hung up without waiting for her reply. I heard Shanice's sobbing break off, replaced by the sound of loud, angry dismay. That night, I slept deeply, as I hadn't in many years. I knew it wasn't over yet. I knew their panic would soon transition into a new phase, desperation. And a desperate person is capable of anything. I knew they would come, that they would try to break through the defense, that they would fight one last, dirtiest battle, and I was ready, but I wouldn't endure a siege. The life I reclaimed for myself shouldn't be lived in fear behind locked doors. On the third day after the attorney's visit, I decided I needed to go to the small market near the Metro North station. I had run out of fresh bread and milk. Nia offered to go for me, but I kindly declined. This was my town, my life, and I wouldn't hide any longer. The day was warm, smelling of dust and blooming jasmine. I walked without haste, enjoying the simple things. The sun on my face, the weight of the light shopping bag in my hand, the feeling of solid ground beneath my feet. I bought everything I needed: a loaf of sourdough, a carton of milk, some goat cheese. Nothing special, just food, just life. They were waiting for me at the exit. An old, dented car, not his, apparently borrowed from some acquaintance, braked sharply at the curb. Jerome practically fell out. Tanya followed slower, but with the same predatory determination. They looked awful. Jerome wore the same blue polo shirt I had ironed for him on my birthday, but it was now wrinkled, the collar dirty. He had dark circles under his eyes. Tanya's usual flawless hairstyle was gone. Her face was pale and angry. The veneer was gone. All that remained was fatigue and poorly concealed panic. Her perfume, which I had smelled on the birthday, was gone, replaced by a metallic scent of fear and stress. They stood in front of me, blocking my way. "Vivian," Jerome began. His voice was a mix of rage and pleading. "We need to talk. You can't do this. You just can't." I looked at him in silence. In my hands, I held the shopping bag. I felt no fear, only a slight curiosity, like an entomologist examining a captured insect. "You've cut off everything. Everything. How am I supposed to live? You threw me out like a dog after 50 years. 50 years of our lives. Do you even understand what you're doing?" He waved his hands, trying to attract the attention of passers-by. Some people turned around, but seeing a typical family dispute, they immediately lost interest. He played the victim with the desperation of an actor losing his audience. His face was red, a vein pulsed on his temple. I remained silent. I let him vent. I knew that beneath this torrent of rage was only fear. He always did that when he was scared. He started screaming. When he saw that his anger didn't impress me, he changed tactics. His shoulders slumped, his voice softened. Whining, pleading notes crept in. "Honey, do you remember everything? Do you remember when we were young, when we built this house, how we raised our daughters? Does all that mean nothing? Can you really erase all of it in a single day? This is our life together, our history. I made a mistake, okay, I admit it. But is it worth destroying everything down to the foundations? Think of the girls, the grandkids. What are we supposed to tell them?" He tried to look me in the eye, searching for a spark of the old Vivian, the one who always forgave, who always understood, who always sacrificed herself for his comfort. But he looked into a void. That Vivian was dead. He himself had killed her 2 months ago when he wrote those lying words about my madness on a piece of paper. I looked at him, and there was no romance, no nostalgia, only the sober realization. He was a very good copy of a husband, but he lacked the essence. Tanya stood next to him. She understood that his pleas weren't working and decided to intervene. She took a step forward. Her gaze was sharp and cold. "Vivian," she began, trying to maintain dignity, but unconcealed hatred crept into her voice. "You can think whatever you want about me. You can hate Jerome, but have you thought about my children? What did they do wrong? My son just graduated from a respected business school. He needs to start his life. My daughter was planning her wedding. You are destroying their future. Whatever you think of us, they are his children. They are entitled to support. You're not just taking everything from him. You're taking it from them too. Don't you have a heart?" Tanya's voice was high and cutting. She coldly used her children as emotional shields to gain financial advantage. It was the purest form of calculation, unveiled by any tenderness. She finished her speech and leaned against Jerome's shoulder, feigning complete helplessness. Silence descended upon the space. Everyone stared at us, Nia and me. Aunt Beatrice looked on with open pity. Jerome's brother, Uncle Robert, frowned, clearly confused. Shanice looked down, ashamed. They expected our reaction. They expected excuses, tears, screams. I remained silent. I only looked at Nia, and Nia understood my look. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply leaned forward, pulled the thin folder from her handbag, which was next to me, and placed it on the coffee table in the center of the room. The sound of the paper lightly hitting the lacquered surface was deafening. The silence Nia broke with the movement was the silence of power. "Here," Nia said quietly and clearly. "Aunt Beatrice, Uncle Robert, here is the application my father filed 2 months ago, an application to have my mother declared legally incompetent. It details how she talks to plants and confuses salt with sugar." She opened the folder. The relatives leaned forward. Robert took the top sheet and began to read. His face slowly lengthened. He handed the paper to his wife. Aunt Beatrice put on her glasses. Jerome jumped up. That's a fake! Nia, what are you talking about? I did that out of concern. I wanted to help her." His eyes were wide. His voice broke into a desperate whistle. He knew this was his end. "Quiet, Dad," Nia said with the same icy tone. "That's not all." She reached into her handbag again and pulled out a small digital voice recorder. She placed it next to the folder. "You talk about paranoia and my manipulation. I think it's something else. Over the past 6 months, knowing something wasn't right, I sometimes turned on the recorder when my father visited us alone, supposedly to check on Mom. He often made phone calls. He thought no one could hear him." Nia looked directly at Jerome, without a hint of triumph, only with the sad, unrelenting clarity of truth. She pressed the button. Jerome's face went as white as the paper in the folder. Tanya clung to the armrest of the sofa. From the small speaker came a voice, his voice slightly distorted but absolutely recognizable. "Yes, Tanya, listen carefully. Tomorrow, when you talk to the doctor, be sure to mention the thing with the glasses. Say she looks for them 3 times a day, and the keys thing is a classic. They'll swallow that." Pause. Sound of a lighter. "No, don't exaggerate. Consistency is important. Not once, but constantly. Say she's become apathetic, no longer interested in anything. That she sits in the garden all day. The more small, credible details, the better. We need to create a complete picture of a personality breakdown." I watched Jerome's brother slowly lift his eyes from the document and look at him with a gaze reserved for something truly abominable. That look from Robert, from his own flesh and blood, was the deepest condemnation Jerome had ever received. He suddenly smelled the cold calculation his brother had hidden for 30 years. Then Nia fast-forwarded the recording a little and pressed play again. And that one sentence rang out, Tanya's quiet, wheedling voice. "Jerome, are you sure this will work? It's taking so long." And Jerome's reply, tired, cynical, full of contempt. "Don't worry, a couple more months, and everything's ours. The goose that lays the golden eggs has finally stopped laying. It's time to pluck her." Nia turned off the recorder. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any scream. It pressed, it boomed in our ears. It seemed even the wall clock had stopped ticking. Jerome stood in the middle of the room, opening and closing his mouth like a fish stranded on the shore. Tanya stared at the recorder with as much horror as if it were a venomous snake about to strike. Robert, his brother, was the first to break the silence. He stood up slowly, threw the papers onto the table, and looked at Jerome, not with malice, but with boundless, icy contempt. "You are no longer my brother," he said softly and clearly. His tone was final. The bond that had held for 50 years was severed. He took his wife's arm and walked toward the exit without looking at anyone else. Aunt Beatrice took off her glasses, her hands trembling. She looked at me, and her eyes filled with tears of shame. "I am so sorry, Vivian," she whispered, and she too walked to the door. Their social world was not just broken. It had turned to ash in a single second, crushed under the weight of a short audio recording. They remained alone in the middle of the room, amidst the ruins of their lies. Shanice wept quietly in a corner, her face buried in her hands. She had now made her choice. Or rather, the choice had been taken from her. Her loyalty to convenience was destroyed. Nia and I also stood up. I picked up my handbag. We said no word, simply turned and walked toward the exit, leaving them alone with their shame. We left Shanice's building into the cool night air. The door closed softly behind us, sealing the past. We didn't look back. We walked silently to Nia's car. We got in, and without a word, she started the engine. We drove through the lights of the Manhattan night, and the car was silent. But it wasn't the strained silence that had reigned in my daughter's apartment. It was the silence of relief, as if after a long, exhausting illness, the fever had finally broken, leaving only weakness and purity behind. It felt like I had finally awakened after years of deep sleep, only to find that the house that held me captive no longer existed. There were no further calls from Jerome or Shanice. No one else tried to reason with us or save them. Their world, built on a lie, had collapsed, and we were no longer a part of it. 6 months have passed. My new apartment is on the 17th floor. The windows face west, and every evening I watch the sunset behind the skyscraper peaks, painting the sky in incredible colors, from soft pink to burning crimson. There is no old, heavy furniture here that preserves the memory of tears and foreign resentment. Just bright walls, light shelves, and lots of air. In the first few weeks, the space felt too light, too free. I had become so accustomed to the weight of responsibility that the emptiness was almost dizzying. But the sun that kisses my walls every morning teaches me lightness. I sold the house quickly and without regret. The buyer, a young tech executive with a family, was thrilled with the garden. He said the house had a good soul. I smiled and thought he was right. The house indeed had a good soul. It had just grown tired of serving as a foundation and wanted to learn to fly. Selling the house was not a loss. It was a liberation. I let go of my beautiful but too heavy masterpiece to begin a new life. With the proceeds, I set up a scholarship for young, underprivileged female architecture students to nourish the dream I myself had given up. That is true justice, transforming the destruction of the old into an opportunity for the new. My days now belong only to me. On Wednesdays, I go to a ceramics workshop. I love the feel of the fresh, malleable clay in my hands. I don't try to create anything perfect. I simply allow the form to emerge on its own. The wheel turns, the clay obeys my fingers, and from a formless lump, a cup, a vase, or simply a whimsical figure emerges. There is something healing in this process. You take dust, earth, and create something new, something whole. In the clay, I found the lesson I couldn't give Jerome. You have to remain moldable. If something breaks, you don't have to collapse. You can start anew. I was recently at Carnegie Hall. I heard the second Rachmaninoff concerto. I sat in a velvet seat in the semi-darkness of the hall, and when the powerful opening chords of the piano rang out, I closed my eyes. I once dreamed of building halls like this, designing spaces where the miracle of music is created. That life didn't happen. But now, listening to this brilliant music, I felt no bitterness over the loss. I felt gratitude that I was finally sitting in that hall, not as an architect, not as anyone's wife or mother. I was simply an audience member, a part of that miracle, and that was enough, more than enough. The music was proof that beauty existed even without my contribution, and my new task was to receive it. Nia and I see each other often. She stops by after work. We drink green tea and talk not about the past, but about books we've read, movies we've seen, the funny incident that happened to her on the subway. Her face is no longer clouded with worry about me. She is calm. She sees that I am doing well. One day, she brought me a small gardenia seedling in a pot. "So, you can have your little garden here too," she said. It now sits on my windowsill, and its porcelain white blossoms fill the room with a subtle, sweet fragrance. This gardenia, delicate yet resilient, symbolized our new relationship, based on truth and mutual respect, not the burden of duty. Sometimes, very rarely, fragments of rumors about that other life reach me. That Jerome is living somewhere in a rental on the outskirts of the city, that Tanya left him and took the children when the prospect of wealth disappeared, that he tries to borrow money from old acquaintances, but no one gives him any. I hear it without gratification, without interest, with the same detached feeling one has reading about events in a distant, foreign country in the newspaper. Those people no longer have any relationship with me. They are characters from a book that has been closed and placed on the farthest shelf. Revenge is too strong an emotion. It burns you inside, and I no longer want to burn. I only want to live. I hadn't robbed him of his existence. I had only withdrawn the foundation that wasn't his. What he built or didn't build upon it was his own, now fair, responsibility. This morning, I woke up early as usual. The sun had just risen, and its rays flooded my bedroom with golden light. I brewed myself a coffee, went onto the balcony, and watched the city awaken. Below, the first cars hummed. Small human figures hurried somewhere, each with their own life, their own story. For 50 years, I was the foundation, reliable, strong, invisible. Others built their lives upon me. Their walls, their roofs rested on me. I thought that was my purpose. But I was wrong. A foundation is only part of the building, and I am the entire building, with my own floors, my own windows that face the sun, with my own roof over my head, a building I have finally begun to build for myself. I sipped the hot, aromatic coffee. The air smelled of freshness and a new day. There were no plans before me, no obligations, no debts. There was only silence. And in that silence, I finally heard myself. It was like navigating through a dense, stuffy noise for decades and then finally hearing the clear, simple ticking of my own inner clock. At 73 years old, my life has just begun. I'm really glad you're here and that I could share my story with you. If you liked it, show me by liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Let's see how many of us there are. Write in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is. I'm so curious to know where all you wonderful people are tuning in from. If you want to support me a little extra, you can also send a small donation. I share new life stories for you every single day. And now 2 of my most popular stories will pop up on the screen so you can choose what to watch next.